recording. Hello, I am Aiden Gutierrez, and I'm with Professor Bayley from University of California at UC Davis, and we'll be talking on the topic of language acquisition. Professor Bayley, I know that it said that you specialized in second language acquisition and people who are bilingual learners. May I ask where you when you chose to go into that field of linguistics?
Oh, okay, well, a couple of things. Yeah, as I said, I'm in the linguistics department at UC Davis. I started out teaching, actually, I started out in literature. And then after I got my master's degree, I taught for a number of years at a community college in Oakland, California. And gradually, as the population changed, we were more and more dealing with non-native English speakers. Right. At that time, there was a big financial crisis. The finances were falling apart, and I took the opportunity to go in the early 1980s, to go and teach in China for a couple of years, and was working with English teachers. And at that time, really got fascinated by the whole process, both in my own struggles with Chinese language, as well as the struggles that some of my students were having. And I was able to go back for a PhD. Fortunately, Stanford offered to finance it. And so that's where I focused in that and wrote a dissertation looking at acquisition of the English verbal system by native speakers of Chinese. I'd also done quite a lot with Spanish and a few other languages, and wound up in my first job post-PhD was at UT San Antonio, which at that time was pretty new. I went there in 1991. And I was there for 15 years, but there was very active. We were training teachers, both bilingual teachers and teachers of English as a second language. And we started a doctoral program as well as UTSA now is I think it was about 14 or 15,000 when I was there, and now it's like 34,000. It's
I passed by. It's big campus.
Yeah, it's been kind of a huge explosion, which is good. I mean, the more college graduates you have in the state, the usually the greater the prosperity in the state. I'm married to a fifth generation Californian. My kids I have adult children in California. So when there was the opportunity to come back to California, I took it. And that's what we work in here. A lot of what I do is concerned not just with getting the things that you have to do, but are you bilingual at all, or do you
sí, Fijito. My family is, so my dad's side is Mexican, but I'm kind of the only one who doesn't know Spanish because my dad never really spoke it to me. Okay. And I'm really fascinated by languages. I've tried learning, Spanish, of course. I did know some phrases to get by, but definitely not fluent. Japanese, there's a class in my school for a year. So I'm still doing that now actively. Good. And I'm also, I've talked with one of the teachers, and I'm going to start it looks like it's going to be a German club next year because the Japanese elective doesn't carry over. So he's going to help me because he's fluent in German, French, and so he's quite a.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Well, I mean, see, some of the things, I mean, if you study another language, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
But even just speaking grammatically, I mean, you need to be able to shift styles and so on. And one of the things that I've done a lot of work on is looking at how people get the ability to use the kind of more informal styles of language because you don't normally get that a lot in a
Right.
classroom. Classrooms are kind of
Formal.
formal places. I mean, that it's, and you don't talk the same way to your teachers as you talk to your buddies. But if you can't talk to your buddies, and this is something that we've seen, we saw like in the immersion programs, in the French immersion programs in Canada, you'd have kids who they would do fine in academic work in French, but as soon as they left the classroom, they want to speak English because they didn't have the way of speaking informally. I mean, you're a teenager. You're not going to talk like a teacher in their 40s or 50s. You're not supposed to.
I have that issue with Spanish when I'm speaking with I have a lot of friends who are Hispanic and they do like say slang and stuff, and I understand it, but I always feel awkward speaking it because I'm not
Well, yeah, because
accustomed to
it's
it.
right. I mean, but these are friends who, and if they have a full, if they're really fluent speakers in Spanish, they've got this whole style shifting down. They know how, and just like you know how to speak, you'll speak one way to your parents, another way to your friends, another way to your teachers, and so on. And so these are some of the things that we look at is how you acquire this kind of ability. And a lot of it is, I mean, it's kind of like being with people in all kinds of interactions. And if you have a network of people that there's only so much you can do in a classroom. You can do a lot. You can get the basics, you can get the structure, you can get everything else, but you can't get the nuances.
So would you say for through language acquisition that it's kind of the fully master language that you need to talk with native speakers, obviously, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
So,
And
so
there's good evidence for this. I mean, actually, a former doctoral student and I are writing a book looking at social network analysis. And these are looking at students who go abroad. And there's sort of a scale we've developed. And I think I can send you that scale. I'll have to.
if you could
Just like looking at the strength of people's social networks when they're studying abroad, how much time they spend with native speakers of the language, what kind of activities they're engaged in, what are the sorts of things they're talking about, and so on. Because you get some students, they'll go abroad and they'll just hang out with other Americans.
Right, and that doesn't.
Which really doesn't do anything. I mean, they might as well stay home. Yeah. I mean, as far as, I mean, they might have a good time, but, or you could be like my niece and find a tutor and marry him, and then she's fluent in Spanish now after being in Spain, and she lives in Spain.
So would you say that if immersion programs are really vital to learning the language?
I don't know if they're vital. They've been very successful. They've been very successful.
Because yeah. Sorry, you go. Oh, I was saying, are there any? Because I know I've looked at some, but are there any that you particularly have studied or looked at?
I haven't really looked at no, I mean, I've looked more at the kind of informal programs. I mean, there are a number of programs. Again, these have become popular in various places around the country. I remember actually when I was living in San Antonio, Alamo Heights, which is, the sort of fancy school district in the San Antonio area. They were setting up a Spanish immersion program, and they did their homework. They were looking at the people in Canada that was based on the Canadian programs and all. And there's a bunch in San Francisco. There's one, I was just talking to a colleague this morning who's, and this is starting with kindergarten, who's sending her daughter to an immersion program. The interesting thing there, I think, is that the students who go to those programs, and there've been, again, a good deal of research, they do as well in English as people in all English programs. And
So
they
there
get
isn't a,
another, so there's no penalty, and they get another language. So it really works pretty well for them.
so is the rumor that, because I've heard this, that you shouldn't, because I think one reason that my dad didn't say that much Spanish as me was because he was worried that I wouldn't pick up English as quickly. So is that just
That's
false
actually,
or?
it's a concern a lot of parents have. And I mean, I saw that even in my own family. My daughter-in-law is Filipino, and they were worried, you know, and when they had a kid, they were worried, and he was speaking a little bit slowly, and she was around a lot of Filipinos speaking Tagalog and so on. And they said, you know, maybe it's a problem. Maybe we should. I said, no, don't worry about it. He's just figuring out what's his first language going to be. And there's no, but the other thing is that and there is a lot of literature on this, that there is a real bilingual advantage. The people who have more than one language. Do you know what executive function is? It's better. It's better.
I've most likely read of it, but I'm not
It's
sure.
kind of self-regulation and control and everything else. That people can do that, that they have more cognitive flexibility. And then at the other end of life, that people who regularly use more than one language, that any symptoms of dementia appear 7 years or more later.
Very big gap.
which which is you know, I mean, and that's a lot if you think about it.
Right.
So and part of it is because, you know, it's like you're always working with two different systems and switching back and forth. Now it's not just, you know, and this is not like somebody who studied French for a couple of years in high school. This is somebody who regularly uses more than one language. But the majority of people in the world do.
We're the
I mean,
oddballs.
well, you know, there's a
Yeah.
there's a group in the University of California system that's started by Judith Kroll, who's a psycholinguist. She studies language in the brain at UC Irvine and several of us. And they have this slogan that, you know, monolingualism is a curable disease. And Texas is a pretty bilingual state.
Oh yeah,
right?
we have a lot of
At least
Spanish.
South Texas is.
That's where
I mean, you
my
know,
family's from. So
you,
there's definitely a lot of.
I mean, you're here in South Texas, you're Spanish everywhere. And then when you get south of San Antonio, you know, it's like the cultural border between the U.S. and Mexico runs through downtown San Antonio.
Have you ever tried learning another language, or do you know another language at all?
Spanish is pretty good. Chinese, I can get by. I once taught Latin. I read French. Yeah, so there's several other languages. Sure.
So, what would you say that in adults over, whenever we become adults or like my age and older compared to kids, I've heard this before and I've seen like different opinions on it. Do you think that our way of learning language goes down? Like we get worse at
I
it
don't know.
over time, or?
I think it's different. There is a lot of debate. What you're talking about is something called the critical period hypothesis. And this came about as a result, and actually it was first formulated in the 1960s. And the idea was with first language. And it was a case where there were some children who had been terribly abused, but were kept, you know, sort of isolated by their family without language and so on. If you look up the story of Genie, Genie, you can see about, you can look it up just on Google.
Yeah.
And And the idea was that and she got vocabulary and all, but she never quite got the grammar of the language. Well, who knows what happened. And then that was extended to second language acquisition. Now, and the question is, and we don't know, but it's, yeah, if you are exposed to two languages from both, you grow up using both of them and so on, you're probably going to be a little bit better than if you learn later. But there are people who sound perfectly native, who started learning a language when they were like your age, you're what, ninth, 10th grade or something?
Yeah, ninth grade, 15.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Well, 15 or even older, and sound like native speakers if they've been immersed in the language. So it's not like you can't, but they're different things. And think about it. What does a 3-year-old have to know to sound like they speak a language?
Hello, Dad. That.
You need to know a little bit more, right? Because you can't talk like a 3-year-old, or people say, oh, this guy is, we don't want to be around him, right? So, but then, it's like anything else, think about it. If you want to learn how to play an instrument to a very high standard, or you want to learn, you want to be a world-class tennis player or swimmer or whatever, you start young, and you're always going to have a lot more time than somebody who started older. And then there are other kinds of things, is it a difficulty? And this is what's not clear. Is it impossible, or is it like anything else? I can't run as fast as I could when I was 20.
Right.
I can still run, but and when you're 40, you won't be able to run as fast as you can now.
Right.
Probably, right?
Yeah.
Is it normal aging? Is that why we see this difference? Because there doesn't seem to, because the problem with saying when is it too late is that when you look at results overall, you see a gradual decline. Whereas if there were a real gap, you'd expect to see it drop off on either side, right? If you think you'd have people who started early to go here, then past a certain age, you go down sharply like that. And that's not what happens. You get this kind of gradual decline, like you do with other things. I didn't all of a sudden drop to half speed.
Right. It was over time. You slowly got there.
It happens over time.
So for learning a second language, whenever someone is my age, or that's what mainly my project is focused on, it's actually learning a language and using language acquisition kind of as a tool. How much would you say, would language acquisition be more important than in class time necessarily? Or do you think like being immersed in a language, is that more important than?
I think they're both work. It depends what aspects. You'll get different aspects. Being immersed in the language, you'll get the kind of fluency, the kind of conversational proficiency, that type of thing. Getting class time, you'll get the kind of more formal aspects of the language, and typically, reading and writing and just the more formal usage. So, that is, you're not going to get, if you're hanging out with people, you're out on a Saturday night, you're having a good time and all that, you're hoping people aren't correcting your grammar, right?
Right.
That seems kind of tacky. But if you do want to speak, like an educated person, then you really do need the formal instruction as well. So so it's a combination of things. the
Okay.
informal interaction as well as the formal basis.
And for being immersed in language and having people speak around you, does it matter if it's that if you can understand it or not? Because I know some people like I've seen people to replicate the kind of people speaking, they like watch TV shows or such in it. But does it matter if you like say put on captions so you understand it, or should you just leave it
Well, I
there
don't know.
if it's
I mean, it's
possible?
like, I mean, the first time I was in a Spanish-speaking country was in 1987. I guess I was in Bolivia. It was part of a teacher training project. And we had a TV and I turned it on. It's just, I started watching a lot of telenovelas and you didn't figure out what's going on.
Yeah, right.
This, they're not real complicated stories, and I mean, you didn't get a whole lot of, there were parts you didn't get at first, but eventually you'd start saying, okay, that's what that means. And that, I mean,
Yeah, it's all
so,
over time.
I mean, I think it's probably better to, I don't know that the captions hurt, but
Mhm.
I mean, there weren't any captions in
Right.
Bolivia, so I mean, they weren't there, and it was fine. So I mean, I don't know that they hurt, but I don't think they're necessary.
Okay.
I mean, I think you're not going to understand a really highfalutin lecture on
Mhm.
particle physics, right?
Right.
But I probably wouldn't understand that in English either. So I don't know if it makes sense.
So does it matter if even if so you still acquire language even if you can't understand it, like just hearing it
Well, you won't
actively?
understand everything, but you'll figure it out.
So
I
your
mean,
head just will your head just
well,
know or pick
well,
up cues?
how does a child learn a language? A child doesn't know everything. And the thing is that we think about like children in our country and and we think about how parents talk to kids, and there's this whole register that and you get this elaborate intonation, very very clear and so on. People don't do that everywhere. Sometimes kids are just immersed in language, you're just around it, and no matter who it is, they get a full language. So, the conditions we think are helpful, maybe they are,
Mhm.
uh, they don't hurt, but they're not necessary because we know that there are other cultures that don't like, where people don't think children, they say, what's the use of talking directly to the child? They don't understand,
Mm.
right? And a pre-verbal infant. Here, people talk to pre-verbal infants all the
Right.
time, right? I don't know if you have little brothers or sisters
A
or.
little sister. I used to my mom had her when I was 8, so I'd always talk to her even though she didn't know anything. So
Yeah,
understand that.
right. Well, we do, but other places don't. But nevertheless,
Mm. You
everybody
still
gets a
learn.
full. So it's like event. It's because things start to come together. You see somebody shouting at somebody to get out, and you see somebody leave. You figure, oh, that's what that must mean.
Mhm. Just
And
I
then
think
you
it's really
hear,
cool. That's
right.
yeah. And for my last question, since we're about to run out of time, uh, do you have a favorite language at all? Just like by like you think it's cool in one sense or another, or one that
Well, not really. I mean, I have probably done more with Spanish than anything else, but and we now have this that several colleagues, and it's a great research resource. We have this huge database of the term heritage language learner.
yes, yes, yeah.
So we have this huge database of written heritage Spanish that some of us have been analyzed. And then Spanish is a second language.
Mm.
Uh, and one thing, by the way, and this is something else to think about that we haven't, that you didn't ask about, but it is something that comes to mind that I think is relevant and is relevant personally to you. That once you have learned another language, and this is relevant to the question about age, if you've learned a second language, then it's easier to learn another one.
Right.
And,
Then it's easier.
regardless of whether they're related or not. I mean, of course, if you speak Spanish, it's probably easier to learn Italian or Portuguese, right? But it's also easier to learn Vietnamese because you've developed ways of learning language. You've figured out how to do this. And once you've figured out how to do something, it's the same thing as if you are a musician learning a second instrument.
Mhm. It's easier because the
It's
music.
easier than because you know how music, you understand how music works, you understand intonation, you know how to stay in tune, and so on and so forth. So and I think that's kind of important. The other thing is, though, that when you talk about what interferes, is that oftentimes and with a third language, in your case, if you start learning a lot of German, don't be surprised if some Japanese gets in the way.
I will say,
rather than your English, rather than your English.
it's been weird at certain points because I'll mess up. I'll put in certain words that aren't actual. Like I'll mess up sentence structure in Japanese compared to Spanish because I was so used to. Because that was the only language I learned. Because Japanese was like the first one that I actually like applied myself to a lot outside of school, and that was oh, that sucked.
Have you done any exchange program with Japan?
No. So my school doesn't really have a big exchange program. It's a private school, so they usually have kids come. They don't really send kids over. But I
Okay,
have looked at over
I
summer.
mean, Rotary Club and things like that
Mhm.
oftentimes have a variety of programs, even for high school kids.
I plan on looking into more because I really enjoy languages. I think that's why
Well, it's
my whole
something to
preference
do
on language.
anyhow.
So,
I mean, I assume at school like that, you're going to be going to college, and it's something you certainly do when you get to college. But it can be done before. I mean, I've various places I've been where there've been high school students, and because staying with a host family is really good
right.
because then you are
Constant.
you're immersed in it, and
Yeah.
you want to. If you want something to eat, you have to ask for it in whatever the target language is.
I have
So, when
I have a
hunger is a
friend.
good
Okay.
motivator.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I actually have a friend who's from China and he's a foreign exchange student. He didn't know anything when he came and now he knows a lot now compared to the start of the year. So it's kind of crazy to see how fast it can happen just through like 6 months. So
Oh yeah, when you're in the situation, it really does because think about it. I mean, if you're in Fort Worth, you study Japanese, you walk outside the class, there's no Japanese around.
yeah, that's
Uh, but if you're in Japan, you walk outside, everybody's speaking Japanese. The signs are in Japanese. You can't escape it.
right. It's all around you. And that's kind of one of the hardest points that I'm coming across, but I'm finding ways to supplement for it. But sadly, I am out of time. So I would just like to say thank you very much for talking to me. And I'll be honest, you're one of like the 10 people I emailed and you're the only one to respond. So thank you very much for that.
Oh,
And um,
well,
yeah, so
yeah.
I'll stop
Well,
the
let me
recording.
know how